Footprints in Ice Age mud in New Mexico that push humans in the Americas way earlier than anyone expected. A tiny bone in a Siberian cave that revealed a whole lost human species still living on in our DNA. And wooden spears in Germany showing Ice Age humans weren't scavengers, they were already coordinated hunters taking down big game. These are ancient discoveries that suggest human history is completely wrong. In White Sands National Park, there's an area that used to be the edge of an ancient lake. So back in 2009, a team of researchers were out there and noticed footprints pressed into old layers of mud, dozens of them from different people. To figure out how old they were, they dated seeds from a plant called ditchgrass that got buried in the same mud layers as the prints. They ran the test multiple times using different layers above and below the footprints and kept getting the same range, 21,000 to 23,000 years old. That's a real problem for what most people learned in school, that humans crossed into North America only 13,000 years ago. That whole timeline is built around the Clovis culture, named after distinctive spear points found across the continent. If these footprints are right, people were already living in New Mexico almost 10,000 years before any Clovis tool was ever made. And these weren't just one or two prints. There's a whole series of tracks from adults, teenagers, what looks like a young child's footprints, crossing back and forth over the same stretch of mud multiple times. This looks like a spot families came back to again and again. So, got people living in North America during the peak of the last ice age. That makes the whole story of how and when people got to the Americas a lot more complicated than the version most of us grew up with. In 2011, near Lake Turkana in Kenya, a team was actually looking for something else entirely. They took a wrong turn and stumbled into a bunch of stone tools. Some of these pieces were big enough that whoever made them probably needed both hands, maybe even braced the rock against something solid to strike it. When they dated the volcanic ash layers around the tools, the number came back to 3.3 million years old. Before this, the oldest tools on record were from a place called Ghana in Ethiopia, dated to about 2.6 million years. These tools are 700,000 years older than that. Homo erectus didn't even exist yet at that point. So whoever made these was something else, probably Australopithecus or a close relative. And that's strange because Australopithecus was thought to have a brain not much bigger than a chimpanzee. Denisova Cave sits high in the Altai Mountains in Siberia. People had been digging there since the 70s, but in 2008, researchers pulled out a tiny chip of bone, part of a pinky finger, from a layer dated to around 40,000 years ago. First, it just got logged as another fragment, looked like it might be Neanderthal, based on where and when it was found. But in 2010, a team in Germany ran a full genome sequence on it, and the DNA didn't match Neanderthal or modern human. It was something else entirely, a population that had split off from Neanderthals tens of thousands of years earlier. They named them Denisovans, after the cave, and things got even stranger. Researchers compared Denisovan DNA to people alive today. They found the populations in places like Papua New Guinea and parts of Melanesia carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. So this species didn't just quietly die out, they were breeding with us. Scientists still only have a handful of bone fragments and teeth to work with, no skeleton, but it's already rewritten the map of who is living where and who is mixing with who tens of thousands of years ago. Back in 1961, miners working in Morocco hit a layer of rock and human bones came up with it. For decades, those bones got filed away as a weird outlier, maybe 40,000 years old, possibly an unusual Neanderthal. But in the 2000s, a team went back to the site and found more. Several skulls, jawbones, teeth, and stone tools, all in the same layers. This time they used a dating method based on how much radiation had built up and burnt flint tools found right next to the bones. The number came back at around 315,000 years old. That's a massive jump from what people thought. The old story had modern humans first appearing around 200,000 years ago in East Africa. These bones blew past that by over 100,000 years. What's strange about the skulls is they're a mix. The face is fairly flat and small, looks pretty close to a modern human face, but the brain case behind it is long and low, more like older human species. So it's not a fully modern skull, but it's not some separate species either. It's somewhere in between. In 1992, road crews working on a freeway expansion in San Diego County dug up a pile of Mastodon bones. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Just logged it as another fossil find, and they put it in storage. Decades later, in 2017, a team went back through the bones and noticed the breaks didn't look like normal weathering or scavenger damage. Some of the leg bones were snapped in the kind of break you'd expect if someone smashed fresh, still greasy bone to get the marrow inside. not bone that had already dried out and fossilized. Next to the bones were large rocks. Some of them had marks on them consistent with being used as hammers and anvils. When they dated the site, it came back at roughly 130,000 years old. That number caused a huge fight in the archaeology world because the accepted range for humans reaching the Americas is usually under 25,000 years. A date of 130,000 would mean some human species was in California over 100,000 years earlier than anyone thought, and it wouldn't even be modern humans, since Homo sapiens hadn't spread that far yet. Some researchers push back on this, saying construction equipment from the original 1992 dig could have caused those bone breaks, not ancient humans, so this one sits in a weird, unresolved spot. In the 90s, a coal mine in Germany was being dug out when workers hit a layer of ancient lake mud. Buried in that mud were wooden spears. 8 of them. Wood almost never survives this long because it rots, but the wet mud sealed them off and kept them intact. The spears date back around 300,000 years, which already makes them some of the oldest known hunting weapons on the planet. The spears were also weighted toward the front third, like a modern javelin. Researchers actually built replicas and had javelin athletes throw them, and they flew pretty accurately. Right around the spears, they also found the butchered remains of nearly 20 wild horses, all roughly the same age, all killed at the same spot. That points to a planned hunt, possibly driving a herd toward a lakeshore where they'd be easier to corner. Before this find, the going assumption was that early humans mostly scavenged carcasses left behind by lions and other predators, and then organized hunting came much later. These spears, sitting next to the remains of all these animals though, didn't fit that scavenger picture at all. Blombos Cave sits right on the coast, a couple hours east of Cape Town, and archaeologists have been excavating it since the 90s. Some of the most interesting finds are small and easy to miss if you're not looking carefully. Pieces of ochre with crosshatch patterns scratched into the surface. They date to somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 years. What stands out about these lines is that they look intentional, like a very early form of art. Alongside the ochre, researchers found shell beads from a small sea snail, dozens of them with holes worn through. Looked like they'd been used to make a necklace. For a long time, archaeologists figured that, arts and crafts didn't show up until much closer to the agricultural revolution, maybe 10,000 years ago. Obviously, this blew that timeline open by tens of thousands of years. In 1986, brick factory workers in Sichuan province, China, hit something unexpected while digging clay. 2 large pits packed with broken bronze and jade objects. When archaeologists showed up and started pulling things out, it quickly became clear this wasn't normal for ancient China. Inside were bronze masks with huge eyes sticking out on long stalks, almost like goggles, but stretched several inches forward. There were bronze trees more than 3 feet tall with birds sitting on the branches. One of the strangest finds was a bronze figure nearly 6 feet tall standing on a pedestal, way bigger and more detailed than anything usually found from that time period. The site is dated to around 1200 to 1000 BCE, which puts it in the same general era as the Shang dynasty up in northern China, but the style is completely different. The discovery really made researchers rethink how early China developed. It wasn't just one culture in the north slowly spreading out and influencing everybody else. It looks more like several advanced civilizations were around at the same time, including this one that almost nobody ever wrote about back then. In 2003, a team digging in a cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia was looking for evidence of early human migration into Australia. Instead, they found a nearly complete skeleton of an adult female, but she was tiny, only about 1 meter tall, with a skull that held the brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's. At first, some researchers thought it might be a modern human with a growth disorder, but then they found more remains, at least 9 in total, all built the same way. So that ruled out a one-off medical condition. It got nicknamed hobbits. Another part that threw researchers off was the dating. The layers sitting above the bones came back to around 50,000 years old, meaning these tiny humans were still alive at the same time modern humans were moving through Southeast Asia. So for a while there, you had 2, maybe more, different human species living in the same part of the world at once. And even with that small brain, these things weren't dumb. They had sharpened stone tools, maybe even used fire, and some researchers think they were hunting a small extinct elephant called Stegodon that also lived on this island. Nobody fully agrees on where these guys fit in. One idea is they came from Homo erectus, got stuck on the island and just shrank down over a bunch of generations. Same thing that happens to other animals that end up on isolated islands like that. Another idea is that they split off way earlier from something even more primitive. Either way, it really blew up the idea that by 50,000 years ago, modern humans were the only ones left. And that has been the video. I will catch you, yes, who specifically, in the next one.